Here with us today is John Quiñones. While growing up in San Antonio, Texas, he knew he wanted to be a journalist like those he saw on television.
Mhm.
Starting his broadcast journey at a country music radio station in San Antonio, he now works for ABC News 2020 and as a host for What Would You Do? John has not only achieved critical and popular acclaim as a broadcast journalist, but also as a news magazine and reality show host, author, and motivational speaker. Numerous works he has produced have achieved excellence, earning him so far 7 Emmy Awards and a Peabody Award. This year, John was inducted into the National Association of Hispanic Journalists Hall of Fame, premiered the 17th season of What Would You Do, and published a book he co-authored with María Elana Salinas, covering their experiences during their coverage of the Robb Elementary shooting and its aftermath entitled 1 Year in Uvalde, A Story of Hope and Resilience. Being one of the most well-known and influential broadcast journalists of our day, John, thank you for being here with us today.
Of course, Ben. Thank you for having me.
Yes, definitely. And looking back on your works, you have numerous accolades. What
Mhm.
made your work stand out from the rest?
I think it was kind of unique and original and different from what we were used to seeing on the air. First of all, I was one of the few Hispanics on television, so that was a big, a big change from what things had been, at least when I started, way back in the 80s. Things have changed now for the better. You see a lot of Hispanic faces and of all stripes, in fact, across America. It reflects the ever-changing face of America. But early on, it was the fact that I could, speak Spanish and I could go to places like Nicaragua and El Salvador and Cuba and the Dominican Republic and came back with stories that perhaps had not been done, at least not in the way that I was doing them.
Definitely. And when you were in these places, you were covering very heavy subjects with extreme poverty, even child enslavement and war. Do you find that these stories, like, even involuntarily come back to your memory? And if so, how do you deal with those memories?
Well, I'm proud of having done them in the moment. Of course, if you're in a war zone, you can't help it but be a little worried about your own safety. Um, and stories that are about child labor and destruction and mass shootings, like we did in covering Uvalde, the school shootings there at Robb Elementary, those stay with you forever. And I think what keeps you going is the hope that by having shined a light on these stories, whatever they might be, that change might come about. And by exposing this, and again, putting the light of television on their plight, whatever it might be, wherever it might be, that folks will see this, millions of viewers, and that perhaps things will change. Either folks vote in a certain way because, of the tragedy that's happened there. Politicians watch our shows. Um, it's one of the privileges of journalism is exposing things that a lot of people don't want to talk about and don't want to hear about, and they don't know about because a journalist hasn't gone there to explain as best as they can what happened. So I think that's what keeps us going. Yeah, you're tearful and afraid and heartbroken in the moment, but when you look at the greater good that might come out of this, that's what keeps me going anyway.
Wow. And I definitely have noticed that throughout your website and your talks, you always bring up shine a light and the expression of, like, even on your website, you have bringing truth to light one story at a time, and even a one-word statement of just illuminate. Why do you use this expression specifically rather than others to appeal to journalism?
Because, democracy dies in darkness, right? As the saying goes. And indeed, it's as if whatever was happening in that particular country or in that high school in this country or in that community, um, without journalists being there to to literally shine the light of cameras and television, then they wouldn't be heard of. And so I think that's it's a very good analogy of shining a light. I like to call journalism the candle in the darkness. Imagine you're in a room and it's really dark, and there's been a storm outside, the electricity's out, and we're all stumbling around in the middle of the night. We can't even see our hands in front of our faces. Well, the journalist, he or she, or they can expose, can shine a light on the darkest corners of that room to illuminate injustice, to illuminate corruption, to illuminate human rights violations or civil rights violations. I think when journalism is done right, and we don't do it right all the time, especially these days, but when it's done right, those are the kinds of stories that we should be telling. So yeah, that's why I call it the light and the darkness, because we're bringing light literally to stories that maybe wouldn't otherwise be told. Many of the stories for which I won the 8 Emmy Awards
Oh,
were stories that we found on our own and that we convinced ABC News to let me go do, right? And it's not cheap. Sometimes you got to take a camera crew and flights and hotels and all that. But I was able to convince ABC to let me go do those stories, me and my producers and my camera crew. We were so committed to that. And had we not done that, maybe it would have remained in the dark.
definitely. And you always have mentioned that you're more interested in those who have been shaken and moved rather than who are doing the shaking and moving.
Yeah.
Uh, does this like approach to journalism, call back to say like when your childhood working on the fields and picking all the fruits and on the farms, and kind of did that influence what stories do you find interesting?
Of course, yeah. When I was a kid, when I was 13, we went to work as migrant farm workers. We didn't speak much English, and my dad was laid off from work, so we went to go pick tomatoes in Ohio and cherries in Michigan, me and my 2 sisters and my mom and dad, and we learned the value of the family coming together in times of difficulty and pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps. But yeah, that's where I realized that too many times the movers and the shakers, the people in power, politicians, the presidents of corporations, presidents of countries and other places around the world, access to the media is easy for them. If you're the president of a university or a corporation, you can issue a press release. You have people who handle those things, right? Well, folks who don't have any power and are often neglected don't have that access. They are the people I call the moved and the shaken. And they're just as important, if not more so, than the people who get all the attention they need simply by requesting it, right? So I've always felt, as having been one of those who was moved and shaken, who didn't have much of a voice growing up in the barrios of the west side of San Antonio, Texas, to the son of a janitor, and the son of a lady my mom who used to clean houses on the rich part of town. I always kind of felt powerless for my people, and journalism has given me that ability to grab a little bit of power by just asking the right questions and again shining a light on those communities and giving a voice to people who normally wouldn't have a voice. That's the greatest payback you can get as a journalist, allowing someone to tell us their plight and to tell us their story.
And definitely. And I remember something you mentioned during your talks, and
Mhm.
it was a quick segment on the kind of bringing your voice and saying you had to uh, change your accent for media presentation.
Yeah.
And that you think back on that. I remember you mentioned that there was like you want to promote people to use their natural accents. Was this something that came later in your career that you thought of, or was it very early on that you thought?
Yeah. Uh, uh, Early on, I had no choice. I knew that if I wanted to work for a major broadcasting company, I I wouldn't be able to do so if I had this heavy Mexican accent that I had growing up. I would say, "These are my shoes. This is my shirt," because in Spanish there is no SH sound, right? It's all a hard CH, and I learned English as a second language, so I had no choice. But I mean, I would watch television and I knew no one had an accent. They all spoke with these beautiful voices, Peter Jennings and Ted Koppel and, Tom Brokaw and Walter Cronkite and Dan Rather, my heroes. So it kind of broke my heart a little bit that just because you have an accent, you might not be able to tell a story. You may just be as good a reporter as anyone else, if not better. But those folks weren't getting an opportunity because the feeling was that it would turn off the audience, that the audience might say, "What is that? Why is he speaking with that funny accent?" Uh, so yeah, I love accents, whether they be Southern or Yankee or British or Australian or Mexican. But I knew that I wouldn't be able to get a job in television if I had that same accent. I'm glad I can speak Spanish because I can turn it on very quickly. And I think things now, times have changed a little bit. I think you do see people, Latinos, with an accent on television, and that's a great thing. We've come a long way. But yeah, early on, I kind of regret that I had to kind of fight so hard to get rid of my accent so that I could address the bigger audience and so that they wouldn't notice. You don't want people to be distracted. When I'm telling my stories, that's the most important thing, right? The story, not the accent with which I deliver that story. And too many times the audience might be saying, wait a minute, what's he saying? Why does he talk like that? And in the midst of all that, they forget to listen to my story. So I don't care how it, what I have to do to tell that story. If I have to change my accent and be perfect at English, I will be so that my story gets out.
Hmm, definitely. And I remember you also mentioned when you were starting out broadcasting, it was really you're struggling to get your jobs going and finding
Hmm.
the next step that you considered applying to law school in that
Hmm.
ordeal. When producing segments for television, you're always focused on the story. Do you approach it like you would a case in a court of law?
Interesting. I mean, you ask the toughest questions, right? So yeah, in a similar way that a prosecutor would or a defense attorney might, yeah, it's kind of similar. I don't fancy myself to having the education of a lawyer because I never did go to law school. I was thinking about it because I couldn't get a job in broadcasting except in radio, and I was starving, and I really wanted to do television. And finally, the opportunity came along. But yeah, and it's similar in many ways. It is. In fact, we have to be very careful in every script we write for ABC News, because we have lawyers and standards people who go over every story that I write with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that what we're saying is true, to make sure that we're not maligning anyone, and that the story is factual. A lot of people don't know that, and that's what really upsets me sometimes when folks call the mainstream media fake news. We work really hard. I have a master's in journalism from Columbia University, and every script I write, even for my show, What Would You Do, is gone over by standards and ethics people to make darn sure that we're not saying anything that's not true. So
Hmm.
maybe we have tougher laws than lawyers do to make sure that what they say is accurate.
And I do have another question is that you mentioned that on your show for What Would You Do, that even the people who give even the most abhorrent answers are more than likely to sign that media consent and release form to be put onto television. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think first of all, people are proud of their opinion, and they like darn, they'll say to themselves, I'm glad I said what I said, even if to others it sounds racist, especially in today's society where everyone has been given, it seems, the permission to say whatever the heck they want, even if it hurts other people. I think more and more Americans are confident that what they're saying is true in their own minds, and they hate the cancel culture, too many folks, where someone is criticized or canceled because of what they said. So I see that trend more and more in the people who respond to our scenarios. They're not ashamed anymore, and in fact, they're proud of it. And many times they want the world to hear their opinion. Some folks still, of course, refuse to sign a release so that we won't show their faces or say their names on What Would You Do. But surprisingly, a lot of people do agree to sign a release and to have us use their reactions, even if others might not think it was the right reaction.
Hmm. And with that, our 15-minute interview is concluded. Thank you again for spending your time with us. And to the listeners at home, definitely check out the book for 1 Year in Uvalde, A Story of Hope and Resilience. And What Would You Do is airing Wednesday nights on ABC.
Yeah,
So,
it'll return. We're done with this season, but it'll
oh,
return January 8th at
January.
10 o'clock Eastern on ABC. So come back
Perfect.
to watch us then. And in the meantime, I'll be doing all those 2020s and whatever ABC News wants me to cover.
Definitely. Thank you, 8-time Emmy Award winner, John
That's right. Thank
Quiñones.
you. Thank
Thank
you,
you
Ben.
again.
Good talking to you.
Good talking to you too.